and welcome to this Tuesday evening gathering, spiritual feast. We're having a spiritual party. And make sure that you all get to partake in it. That when you go back, make sure that you have gotten spiritual gift within you. Spiritual gift is not that difficult to recognize. It's something felt within you, something spiritually felt within you, a spiritual feeling that gives you fulfillment, understanding, and deep down a confidence that yes, I can do it. Yes, I can succeed in seeing things in the way I want to, rather than be dictated to. And that way, stay control of what I undergo. And deep down, confidence that come whatever may, I will be able to see it in the way it should be, it ought to be. Not necessarily in this particular way or that particular way, but something that resonates with that circumstance, with that situation, yet always coming out victorious, coming out victorious, coming out, gaining, becoming richer in spiritual wealth. So yes, remember we are here for a spiritual party, spiritual feast. Make sure we all partake of this. Just as when we go to a party, we make sure at least we get something. So here, more so. So with this reminder, not for you, for myself, let's now sit for meditation. Try to straighten up. Feel assured this is not going to be a painful, long meditation. So right from the very beginning, feel intended to make the most of this short period. Okay. Yes, with the back upright. Take 3 rounds of deep, deliberate breath, breathing in through the nostrils and out through the mouth. When I say deep, deliberate, I really mean it. And then when you release it fully. And then while you release it, if you are comfortable doing, imagine that you are also releasing any dirts within you, more particularly emotional dirts, cognitive dirts. And along with that, physical, mental tensions also feel that those are also being released out. Let's begin with the in-breath. And now, at your own pace, slowly come back to the natural breathing. Breathing in and out through the nostrils. And as we do so, try to rest our attention on the breath as it flows in and out through the nostrils. Just be aware that you're breathing in when you're doing, and that the breath flows out when it does, and try to taper one's attention down to the awareness of nothing but the breath. Remember to breathe naturally, which means you do not have to exert any specific force, length, strength. You don't even have to think to breathe. Just breathe as you usually do. And all you have to do is be aware of that natural process of breathing as it happens at its own terms. Fully present in this present moment, with one's attention focused on this singular present activity of breathing, and try to stay with this awareness for as long as one can, for as many rounds as one can, without break. As soon as you see your mind having wandered off, merely acknowledge that as what has happened, as part of the actuality, as part of the reality, and graciously remember to bring the mind back to the breath and start over all again. Let go of all other thoughts. Thoughts may arise, don't chase after them, don't hold on to them. Just merely acknowledge their having happened, but don't pursue them. Merely remember to come back to the breath and stay with it, as though walking hand in hand with the breath, with nothing but the breath to walk with, to be aware of. Whenever one feels the need of taking a deep breath, just merely allow that. Whenever the breath on its own becomes longer, slower, shallower, deeper, just merely allow that without budging about it. Until it becomes uncomfortable, at the point of which you can come back to the natural breathing once again, and then continue with that. To help facilitate the focus, if it is too difficult, one can resort to silently counting 1, 2, 3, mentally though, at every round without break. And as soon as one loses track of it, one can start over again and to stay and try to stay with the breathing, with the counting for as long as one can. As and when one feels that one has relatively succeeded in staying with the breath, then let go of the counting and once again come back to the usual meditation. Aim for a state of restful attention. Attentively focus on the breath, feeling restful that the mind is not engrossed with so many thoughts crossing through it. All it has to do is just be with the breath. There too, one is not asked of anything but to be merely aware, merely feeling the sensations of the breath as it happens in the nostril, somewhere in the nostril, when it enters in or flows out. Try to approach this meditation with a sense of delight in what you are doing, with a sense of enthusiasm. Let's all together take 2 rounds of deep breath and return back to the meditation once again without my having to intervene for the next 3-4 minutes. Let's begin by taking in breath. Now slowly, taking your own time, at your own pace, come out of the meditation by opening your eyes or lifting your gaze. Yes, this evening we are going to discuss, we're going to hear on what is called the integration of four remembrances in our daily life. This particular piece is authored by the first Panchen Lama, master from the 16th, 17th century, mid-16th and mid-17th century. This is the same master who did the Mahamudra teachings, Mahamudra texts of which we received teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as well as from His Holiness the Ganden Tipa, for those of you who happen to attend those. But that's not important. And the important thing is to make sure that we get something from the part of the feast. Yeah, first let me list out the four remembrances. On the surface of it, I don't think those will be that appealing. But let me try my best in making the point, in talking you into yes, accepting it, or at least maybe making some sense out of it. Because I have a difficult thing to do, maintaining a difficult balance between the tradition and the modernity. Oh, that's a difficult balance of walking on a tight rope. So, since this is from a traditional text, I have to first tell it in the traditional form, and then see how much I can push in accepting, in making you at least saying, oh, yes, or maybe I will fail. But then I will take a step back and then try to then look at it from our modernity perspective, more particularly from the scientific perspective of our day, and then see how much of the part of the feast we can really digest to make our spiritual enrichment possible. So the four remembrances these are something to be remembered on a regular basis and integrated in one's perspective on a daily basis. And the purpose behind that, the benefit behind that, is for one's unstoppable, continuous, unceasing spiritual growth. So that's the main purpose behind this. So the four remembrances are, as I warned you earlier, the first one is remembering all sentient beings as having been one's mother. What would you say? Take this or this? That's one. And then the second one is even more difficult one. Remembering one's master as Buddha. What would you do? I have difficulty. I'm trying to make it as informal as possible. That's the reason why I'm almost seemingly poking you. But the main purpose is just so that it becomes a mutual discussion. That's the second. Now the third one, to remember one's body as not that of the ordinary same body, succumbing to all these aches and pains and whatnot, but a body made of spiritual technology, a body of a fully awakened being. That's difficult. How in the world are these going to help in my daily life? I have difficulty. That's what I'm saying of myself. Now the fourth one is remembering everything, all phenomena, as an interplay of interconnection. That part is okay. Except we have to still push, because we usually don't see ourselves and situations in that light necessarily. Although the moment we give thought to that, then we begin to understand, yes, of course. But as soon as we lay back or lie back and move about our life in our own usual biased consciousness or biased unconscious consciousness, we tend to look at everything almost in a self-contained cut-out form. So the fourth one is also difficult, but not so seemingly far-fetched. Let's now tackle all the four and then see whether we would be willing to remember them in our daily life. One thing, and if at all we succeed in remembering them, can we be sure that, yes, remembering them would definitely help in enriching my spiritual wealth, spiritual health? That's the main purpose behind that. We are not trying to remember something just merely for the sake of remembering something, but for the sake of them contributing to our spiritual well-being. For our spiritual well-being, because we are spiritual beings. Spiritual, not necessarily in the spiritual religious, but spiritual in the sense that we basically live and move about. The whole driving force is our mental, spiritual experience. That's the whole driving force behind us. And that's what we want to increase on. That's what we want to enhance on. That's what we want to get some grip on, to kind of master on, to thus feel at control that, yes, I have the button for my spiritual lightening up. I have the button with me. It's not that somebody else has the button and they kind of bring me down or up at their will. So that's the whole purpose behind all of these. Now, the first one, seeing all sentient beings as having been one's mother. I'm very particular. I have come up with the caveat, having been, not, or you could even say having been and will be. So long as one is subject to this cycle of birth and death, one would have to depend on a mother. At least if one takes the womb-born birth, for that one has to have a mother. There are other ways of being born. But the most major one is birth from a womb. For that we need mother. So this caveat that having been, not that all sentient beings, although in the writings you will find remembering all sentient beings as one's mother in the sense of as having been one's mother. That too for numerous times, countless times, without exception. This part is very difficult. For that, one has to allow that, yes, this is not the first and last life. That's difficult. Interestingly enough, even I have seen in the scriptures, if you haven't paid attention in the Bodhisattvacharya Tara or the Bodhicharya Tara, the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the masterpiece by Indian master Shantideva. Here, he also mentions in his text when having to resort to this concept of every sentient being having been one's mother for countless times beforehand, and how one would have to depend on them for the same kindness for, who knows, next several lives, unless one makes effort and succeeds in breaking the cycle of birth and death under the condition of afflictions. Even in those texts he refers, because it's quite evident that even he was feeling unease in sharing that. He was also sensing that, oh, maybe in the audience there are some who would have difficulty accepting it. And what he does, how he pushes that point forward. See, Buddhas cannot be mistaken, and Buddhas have said so. It must be so. That's so interesting. Even in this very text that I'm basing on, even there also, irrespective of the fact that the text is just a short one, even there also, he doesn't miss on that. Having to bring that up, he has to put that line saying, Buddhas cannot be mistaken, and this is what Buddhas have said. And Buddhas know more than what you know. That's a thin line to rely on for such a concept that would have a bearing on us if we were to take this seriously. Now, how can we make sense of this? And how can we, more importantly, make use of this? For one thing, we don't know. We don't know for sure, including science, what consciousness is. That's not just me saying that. I've heard so many interviews by eminent scientists, some molecular scientists, some not necessarily all of them, those who have been dubbed as paranormal scientists searching into the paranormal, but those who are in the mainstream with impeccable scientific background and still, as you say, up and about in the main business. That what consciousness is, it's not that clear. All we can come up with is neural correlates, where we can speak of action potentials being fired with electrical impulses, chemical impulses, but they are happening just at this very moment as we are speaking in thousands, millions. Could it be that we are having thousands of consciousness? It doesn't seem like. But anyway, to equate them with the consciousness would be a little difficult. There may be signs of conscious activities happening, but to equate them with the consciousness themselves, that would be too difficult. Then we would have to almost say wires. Let me be blunt. Even the wires, when they have short circuits, there would be a consciousness there. The wires would be saying, ouch! Something like that. I mean, that's definitely not the case. And then, yes, chemical impulses, that can take place in inanimate things also. So, even the neuroscientists themselves, I think majority of them, they do not say that this is equal to the consciousness. They just may say, we don't know. Interestingly, there was one, this time I will try to, this will be a challenge on me, I will try to be very mindful in really touching all the points, okay? That will be a challenge for me. That will be my spiritual feast. I'll be partaking of, and then I'll let you to choose whatever feast you like. But I'll be the one who is cooking and laying it out. So I have to be super duper mindful. Yes. Interestingly, there is a neuroscientist from Harvard University who was professor teaching there by the name of Alexander Eben. He was himself a hard-nosed neuroscientist like anybody else, towing the official line, saying consciousness, at least officially, said consciousness is nothing but an emergent quality of the brain, which reduces it to basically a physical thing, which means that with death or with the dysfunctioning of the brain, there will be no consciousness. We will be no more conscious. And with the brain gone, it will be hard to say how consciousness returns back. Anyhow, he himself underwent, I think, 7 days of deep coma and had so many experiences. When he came out of that, he was a totally different, changed person. He is still a neuroscientist. He is a practicing neuroscientist, but no more towing the official line. He even has written a book about heaven, about life beyond consciousness. So the crux lies on the nature of consciousness. So one thing for us to ask is, does it look like after we die, our consciousness would also be severed? Difficult to say yes or no, either way. But somehow most about everybody seems to believe that the journey continues. At least we want to believe in that, so that our friends, whoever die, we at least, sometimes even to individuals who are very connected, they even feel their presence. And then there are so many sightings also, including that of Elvis Presley, even after their death. So how would we account for them? Now, and then there are so many cases of people remembering past life. People who have remembered past life and whose, medical records have been tallied. Some born with birth marks that tally with who they said were in terms of what they had gone through in the terminal period, etc., etc. Lots of them. I'm not going to go through them all because I have to be mindful. So what I'm saying is that maybe it's possible that this is not the first and the last life that we would ever live. One thing to also think how it might be possible is that not everything can be explained through genetics. Earlier the favorite theory was behaviorism. Then it was epigenesis. Now it is epigenetics. Not even genes can determine who we become. Surroundings. And then, more importantly, that is to do with, that is to do with how we become in terms of physical. Even genes cannot determine who we become, what we become, how we become, because identical gene-based beings can turn out to be very different. And it looked like all we could just best do is that maybe the environment is changing. Environment is affecting us. But then environment affects us maybe to a certain degree, but then in terms of, and thus make us change how we look and how our hairs turn out to be, etc., etc. But then in terms of mental capacities, mental propensities, mental latencies, we turn out to be very different, even identical twins, in terms of their likes, dislikes, phobias, inclinations, whatnot. So, long story cut short, the possibility of our having continued from before and that we could continue still even after death is not a closed question. It is not a closed topic, even from a scientific point of view. That having been said, it is much more better to allow for that, so that we would have a wider space to play in terms of relating with us. We could go beyond this life and say, oh, we were related. We had served as father, parents, children among us. And thus get that space, rather than be constricted into this very life and then have hardly any space to really play much. Even during the time of Buddha, I remember I have 3 more topics to go. Even during the time of Buddha, Buddha was asked this same question. It is in the Kalama Sutra from the Pali tradition. He would walk, he would wander around with following, maybe initially just singly, and then eventually following followers of monks and nuns. That was in the Lichavi area. That's the area where he gave the third Dharma teaching. He was asked, many teachers come and pass by. They give teachings. Last time you came, you taught on the 4 immeasurables. That was awesome. They might have said, in our own term, they might have said, that was cool. But then sometimes, or every now and then, you tend to hint at the possibility of life before, life after, at the working of karma, not just within this life, but that goes beyond this life. These are so difficult to understand. What should we do? Buddha said, what hurt is there? What harm is there if you believe in them? Because all it entails you to do upon believing it seriously is to conduct yourself well now, here and now. And conducting yourself here and now amounts not just conducting yourself physically, verbally, but more importantly, mentally. If you conduct yourself mentally well right now and here, that's what is going to benefit you here and now also. And if there were to be something following, then that would take care. Nothing else but that would take care. Physical health, monetary wealth, none of that would have helped. Only that would help, because the continuation would have to be explained only on the process of the consciousness. And at the consciousness level, you have conducted yourself well in cultivating positivities, in overcoming, in undermining negativities. Because your concern goes beyond this life, of not just tomorrow, of not just next year. Because even with that kind of a concern, that helps. If that goes beyond, which is when one would be totally in the group, in a new group of families, if at all they are. Or who knows, could be all by oneself. That's when one's mental wealth, mental health, mental cultivation, which would be inseparable from you, would be there to support you. Because you would have been mentally trained in the positivity so much that the inclination, the latency, the propensities for the positivities would be more. Just as here and now, we see difference, not just on the physical level, but on the mental level of what we are inclined to, what our propensities are, how easily inclined are we towards anger, jealousy, greed, how easily trainable we are to positivity, love, compassion. We vary. We vary so much. How would we explain that? If there were to be a continuation later on, that's what would surface. So Buddha said, what harm is there if you believe in karma? What harm is there if you believe in life before and life after? Because if you believe in that, if you accept that, or at the very least allow for that, and you are serious on it, all that would entail you to do is conduct your body, speech, and mind positively. Then that's win and win. Win, win, win. Because as sentient beings, the bottom line is the feeling, the experience. Although in the corporate world we say the bottom line is money. Well, where does money lead one to? Sometimes it really takes you to the bottom. To the bottom, really to the bottom. To the bottom that one would have never imagined. What has happened with so many corporate giants? If the bottom line, if all that would take care is material wealth collection, then the story would have been different. That's not the case. It's not to say that material wealth is bad or good. It depends on how mature we are inwardly. Then if we are mature inwardly, then whatever we have becomes a double boon. Even what we don't have would not be missed that way much. So that's what Buddha taught. He didn't say, you must believe in this, you stupid, you must believe in this. No, he didn't say that. He said, what harm is there? At the very least, if you allow for that. As I said earlier, you get much bigger space to think about, to reflect on in relating with others. Because without that concept brought in, then all we have to play with is just this life. They say, we have to think of the kindness of others, of having been one person having been one's mother. There can be two mothers, just one mother, right? One cannot be born double. One mother, one father, just one mother, one father, and then one brother, or maybe 2, 3 brothers, sisters, and then the rest as familiar strangers, unfamiliar strangers, whatever. And then from among them, some saying, oh, just from very birth till death, they have been very mean to me. Then we would have to exclude someone. That wouldn't be a full cultivation. But then if we say, irrespective of what we are related right now and then, we have all served as mothers and fathers to each other. And during that time, like the parents of this life, like the friends of this life, like the teachers of this life, they would have served me, even at the risk of their life. Remember those kindness. I can't think of any other way of relating with others that would be as comprehensive as that of allowing for this long-term relationship, where we would definitely have, not just once, twice, numerous times of having been benefited, having been cared for, having been... No, of course, occasions for having been hurt also, but... And those just sporadically. But having been served, having been benefited, invariable. So, allowing for that, not in the sense of naively accepting it, but in the sense of having it, but in the sense of maybe this is possible. But then, if it is difficult, the bottom line here is to remember the kindness of others, to remember the kindness of others to the extent possible in whatever way. It should not be just merely left to whatever occurs to you intuitively. No, 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 no. One has to dig deep into looking at our interconnected web of life. See how, despite seemingly otherwise, being otherwise, how we are benefiting from each other. Even if that be just within this life also. Those beings that we have never seen, we benefit from them, from their thoughts, from their ideas, concepts, inventions, discoveries, whatnot. And then even now also, as a social being, irrespective of how we clearly see them or apparent or not, we are dependent on each other. Even the weaknesses of others serve as a mirror to you. It's like saying, if somebody is acting very mean to you, they say, saying, you too have the potential for that, and do you want to do that? No, don't do that. It is so bad. Look at me. And if somebody is doing very well, it's saying, it's like holding up the mirror saying, you can do this. You have the same potential. If you like it, you can do this. It's almost like it goes much, much stronger than the words. So basically, the first remembrance is through every means possible, remember the kindness of others. Remember kindness not necessarily in the sense of others being deliberately kind, which would be the case in the case of serving as mothers. That's the plus point in there. But in terms of kindness, I do not necessarily mean someone deliberately coming up with a kind, meaning attitude. Kindness in the sense of how others present themselves in whatever packages, but with the potential, never separate from the potential of benefiting you. So for the interest of time, I cannot expand on it, but definitely you would do a much, much better job and much better job in really relating to how we are interconnected and how we are dependent on others. It's amazing how very often people whom we call disabled from accidents, natural disasters, whatnot, many of them come out courageous, going through the personal difficulties, unimaginable, yet coming out, struggling through that, and then presenting themselves in front of us as an invaluable inspiration. Sometimes making us ashamed. These so-called disabled people are widely differently abled than we are, who are supposed to be intact. So likewise, if we dig deeper, we can see how we already have benefited, we are benefiting, at the very least, others hold that potential for immensely benefiting us. Benefiting that too in not just material sense, but in a spiritual sense. That can last long, serve us. So that's the remembrance. So part of the meditation in a daily life should not be just merely confined to chasing after the breath. Just breath, 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 breath. Yes, it will make us feel spaced, not spaced out, feel spacious, right? It will make us feel spacious, calm, whatnot. And then in the wake of that, within that space, then think of the kindness of others. Think of the interdependentness of others. Then what would happen is, it's almost like in that leveled ground, now a lotus will begin to grow. Lotus of love, compassion, feeling of warmth. That's one remembrance. Not just one time, on a regular basis, remember the kindness of others, the interconnectedness of others. Now the second one, difficult one, another difficult one, is to remember one's gurus, one's masters as Buddhas. When we say Buddhas, do you know all Buddhas are not Buddhists? Even from a Buddhist point of view, all Buddhas doesn't necessarily have to be Buddhist. Actually, the historical Buddha himself wasn't Buddhist. Buddhists came much later. So when we say Buddhas, we mean fully awakened beings. It could come in so many forms. There can be so many among you also. That's why one of the practice in the Tibetan Buddhism is that you know yourself well, but you do not know others. Don't presume. Don't jump. Don't jump on conclusions. It's almost like Teve Medong. It's almost like surface is covered by earth, but underneath there may be a dungeon, there may be a fire. Likewise, you don't see what is underneath. It can be a sparkling jewel of enlightenment. You don't see. Don't presume. You know yourself. So go about your life in improving if you need to, and in rejoicing if you have qualities, whatnot. But don't jump on presuming who others are. You don't know. Likewise, we have a saying, there could be Buddhas everywhere. So when we say Buddhas, we do not mean Buddhist Buddha. In the first place, Buddhas are not Buddhists because they do not follow Buddhas. Buddhists are those who follow Buddha or supposedly following Buddha. Buddhas don't need to follow anyone. They are fully awakened. That's the reason we say, I go refuge in Buddha until I'm enlightened, not forever. When you become enlightened, you don't need to. So, one thing, Buddhas are not Buddhist because they don't follow any Buddhas. Another thing is Buddhists came much, much later. So is Christian. We all come up, care so much about divisions, right? So, seeing one's master as Buddha, fully awakened being who has no other business but to care for others. Because he or she, there can be he Buddhas also, he Buddhas also. Like even in the images, you see Tara, goddess Tara, is a Buddha. So, Buddhas are fully awakened in that their potential for positivity would have been consummately blossomed. Thus, their love, compassion, wisdom, etc. would have been fully awakened with no chance whatsoever of ever reverting back to dormancy. And thus, they have achieved their own aims. There's nothing left for them to achieve anymore. All that's left is serve others. And for that, they have no choice because they are driven by their strength of love, compassion. If that is the case, if indeed there are beings who care so much, who have achieved that kind of a level for themselves, how else would they come if not in the form of your teacher, whom you listen to, whom you care to look up for qualities? And not just that, who risk even being stupid or even being naive so that they could relate with us. No matter how fully awakened they may be, if they were to come in their full grandeur, splendor, our eyes cannot catch it. Our mind cannot digest it. Like cats, dogs would relate more. If you fake like a cat or dog, then they will play with you. If you insist on becoming or insist on playing human to them, to a certain extent you may relate with them, but not totally. But if you come down to the dog's level, cat's level, play around, they will relate with you. So do we need fully awakened, compassionate Buddhas to come in those forms. Until our perception becomes pure, we lack seeing all others in that image. So, only the select few whom we have dedicated ourselves as being student to would be the ones that we would listen to, that would become like the channel through which the messages, the teachings, the lights should come. So on top of the possibility that they could be Buddhas, they are even more kind, they are even more, they are even more kind to us. Although one doesn't need to rush to develop that kind of relationship with someone as a teacher or whatnot, one has to take time in really thoroughly examining them, knowing what the qualities to look for. Once you have seen them in someone, not necessarily in full, but in relatively more qualities, then life is too short to leave it to a later time, to then dedicate to such a relationship, and then listen to them. Always look up to them through the lens of looking for qualities, always being hungry that, yes, here is a source of qualities that I can look for. Even in their failures also, you would see qualities. That comes only when, through our own reflection, deliberation, we succeed in seeing them as nothing less than Buddha. If that is difficult, now let me water it down. Then, at least be always mindful, always be looking for qualities, looking for the positive side of things. If you care to look at the positive side, there is a possibility, at the very least, there is the possibility of seeing a good quality. It do not succeed every time, but there is a possibility. If you completely rule that out from the very first, then you would only see the dark sides. And then in the beginning it is difficult to see that with regard to everyone. At least someone whom you aspire, whom you admire, do bring them up. Don't let it be limited to personally seeing them, but do bring them up again and again in your imagination, and think of their qualities, think of their teachings, think of their actions, and be inspired by them. That's remembrance. That's the second. See, I'm doing good. Yeah. Now the third one. That is exotic. That is an exotic idea. This is borrowed from the Tibetan Vajrayana level of teaching, where there is an emphasis on overcoming ordinary perception and ordinary appearance. But there is a reason for that. So far we have been talking about cultivating, developing our positivity, enriching our positivity, or tapping our potential, almost like from a bottom-up approach. Now there is another approach, top down. Think of a fully awakened being, Buddha, fully awakened. Not just fully awakened because of the mental quality of being fully awakened. Their condition of the physique, their condition of the word, speech, etc. is also different. So to be able to capture all of that within one's imagination, one would have to at least spend time in reading what a Buddha would look like, what a Buddha's environment is like, what Buddha's body is like, etc. Then one would do a better job in really in impressing that, Buddha mold, in impressing that Buddha, what do you call Buddha stamp, Buddha emblem, almost like impressing it on oneself. It's almost like this. We have the potential. From a Buddhist perspective, we say everyone has the potential. Every sentient being has the potential of becoming fully awakened Buddha. And the sign for that is that the mind is not intrinsically defiled. It is temporarily defiled. Like we give rise to anger, jealousy, greed, and temporarily, richly so. Temporarily, but very richly defiled by, defiled by these afflictions. So much so that all it takes is just a very slight, slight trigger, slight prodding to give rise to this full-blown anger, jealousy, greed, etc. But these anger, jealousy, greed, they do not enter into the fabric of the mind, which is to say that they do not enter into the very nature of the mind. The mind itself is almost like a glass ball, or a glass ball, or except it right now appears like being fully covered by pollen. But when the rain of wisdom, cultivation begins, the pollens are washed away without losing the glass bowl. First and foremost, because the pollens are not part and parcel of the glass bowl. They do not enter into the very fabric of it. So do we say is the case with our consciousness. No matter how deeply covered it may be with these afflictions, to the point almost like inseparable, yet they stop short of entering into the very fabric of the mind. And that is the Buddha potential. That can be nurtured. That can be activated. That can be nurtured, activated, brought up, expanded, made to come to the forefront. So we have that potential. So when we imagine becoming fully awakened, it is not totally, what do you call? It is not totally baloney. It is not total baloney. There is a reason for that. There is a potential possibility for that. What we are trying to do is we are not waiting for that to happen. We are even, while recognizing that, we are shooting off to imagine it, create it for us, and then bring it down, map it down to the basic potentials within us. After all, when we bring it down, map it down to our mental stream, mental consciousness, it affects our mental consciousness in kind of impressing, in at least giving an idea of what would be a fully awakened Buddha-like compassion. when you assume the Buddha's form physically and also mentally, then you would at least try, like we play, like we do in our plays. You are Shakespeare, you are someone, Macbeth, whatnot. Then you try, right? At least in that, you almost, depending on how good job you do, you almost get lost in it. Sometimes you even think like, oh, I have taken up some of the idiosyncrasies, some of the attitudes of that person. That's what we are doing. Based on the potential we have, we try to imagine that and then almost like impress it upon us. That's what I call top-down approach. It's a quicker one, except difficult one. So if we can do that, at least saying now, saying, oh, in the morning I have done this cultivation, I have assumed the form of a fully awakened, I have assumed the form of the Buddha of compassion. And when you retain that remembrance, when you retain that mindfulness, and you are confronted with a situation, if you remind yourself that, oh, I have assumed the form of the Buddha of compassion. I'm confronted with this situation. How would a Buddha of compassion react to this situation? Not the ordinary me. That's how one has to bring that idea into play in actual reality. No matter how far-fetched it would look, it does have a practical basis, but at the same time it has a very functional, operational benefit. So that's the reason why many of you remember, many of you do the sadhanas. At the end of a tantric Vajrayana sadhana, where in the middle of a sadhana you may be assuming the form of a Buddha of compassion with 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes and whatnot, that would be a little difficult to walk around with. And you would take up lots of space. So actually, in the practice, once you go through that, towards the end, you go through some kind of what we call dissolution. You dissolve into a simplified form with 2 arms, 2 legs, yet in the Buddha compassion form. And you are supposed to remember that every now and then, remind yourself of that. Then you would eventually, directly, indirectly, help in modulating your attitude towards things, your actions, etc. That's one way, a smart top-down form approach. So that's one of the remembrances, remembering one's body, not in the ordinary form, but in the form like that of a Buddha of compassion, like that of a Buddha of whatever. See? That's the top-down. In the Bodhicharvatara text, you remember? It does the same, but it uses the same concept, but it uses another image. Because it would be too far-fetched to say, oh no, imagine that you are Buddha. In the Bodhicharvatara, it says, when somebody disturbs you and corners you, puts you in a difficult situation, you feel like now your anger is going to burst out. Imagine that you have now become a log. A log would not only just stay petrified, but would not even run any thoughts. That's the best option you have at that time. There are stanzas there. Remember, you are a log. Remember, you are a log. Or in our times, you say, remember, now you are playing a statue. If somebody says, you something, you say, I'm statue. That's playing statue where you have become petrified and you have no thoughts. But here it's even better. Now you become Buddha of compassion. You would not look stupid. You would even relate with them, but relate with that power, with that energy of a Buddha of compassion. Nothing less, Buddha of compassion. If you imagine, if you even for a second imagine, oh, what would I do if I were Buddha? Definitely you would come up with so many interesting insights. of how to deal with that situation, rather than be stuck with that situation. See, oh, how would we usually do that. How would he do? How would you do? Sometimes we would ask, sometimes we would imagine ourselves, how would he do? That's in play here. Third one. Now I only have one, and I have 4 minutes. I could even handle 3 more. Now the fourth one. Wow, the fourth one. The fourth one is not giving in to our bias consciousness, to our bias, what do you call? Bias, existing, obstinate way of thinking, seeing things in almost in a clear-cut form, saying, you are you, this is this, this is this, this is table, this is cup, nothing to do with them. No, that's not the way the reality is. The reality is much more complex. Just who I am, who I have become, what I have been through, thinking of my embryonic life, or even farther back, as a life as one gamete, one zygote, into. I'm not going to show off my biology, understand? But think of that. Think of that, of what we have gone through. We started out as two gametes connected into a zygote and then developed into these things, into this. If we take that into consideration of who we are, what we have become, and what we can become, we would begin to see ourselves in a much more loosened up perspective. There will be much more room for flexibility, rather than saying, I'm just this. And in reality also, we are not this. Oh, it doesn't take that much to make us realize who we are. Anything can happen. And we'll begin to remember, oh, I wasn't this. I wasn't this. And I'm dependent on someone. I remember one time, I owned a bicycle. Earlier, I used to walk through the same road and I would see a bicycle mender, repairer. I would hardly look at him, thinking that I have nothing to do with you. I would just walk past him and go about my business, saying, you down. I'm just kidding. But somehow, I wasn't thinking that I would be ever related to him. The moment I went to a shop and bought a bicycle, I thought of him. Oh, he became so essential to me. Wow. Now, afterwards, even I gave up my bicycle. I kept thinking, oh, I could own a bicycle and I would be as dependent on him. That's just one idea. So many, even without having to own. I mean, we don't have to go that extent of owning something to realize it. Oh, just being here, think of what I'm wearing, what I'm saying, and just the fact that I'm speaking is because you are here to listen. And not just that, here is a space that allows for that. So if I remember that, then I would bring down the ego. Nothing. I could be reduced to nothing tomorrow. If you care, if you don't come to listen, and the center kicks me out, everything comes down. It doesn't need to do that. Something happens, I could be reduced to nothing. If I remember that, one would have a much more flexible way, perspective towards oneself and towards others. And that's closer to the reality. The reality is even much deeper in terms of interconnectedness. So the basic bottom line is to remember oneself, situation, everything in that interconnectedness. which is what the reality is. Remember that interconnectedness. The more interconnectedness we begin to think of, the more hopeful we will become in the face of tragedies and whatnot. The tragedies would not look like would not look like a single en bloc thing. They would look like a network of many things that have so many strands that one could pull. Likewise, things that you need to work on. You can begin to develop single threads one at a time and build it up. It's not that it comes or don't come. So that's much more closer to reality, and remembering that is very helpful. So these are the 4 remembrances. I still have 1 minute. These are the 4 remembrances, and the remembrances one need to cultivate every life. In the text, it even gives you a kind of a systematic run-up to the 4, one after the other, beginning with the remembering of the kindness of others, thinking of one's master as Buddha, and then eventually dissolving him into the Buddha form, and then going about one's life while maintaining that perspective and trying to look through the lens of interdependence. For that to come up front, easy, one has to set aside a time to cultivate that, to do a meditation session, beginning with focusing on the breath, but not limited just to that, followed up with thinking of the kindness of others, of thinking of the kindness and qualities of one's master. If possible, take on the form of a Buddha, or imagine how it would feel like, how would a Buddha react to a situation, knowing what Buddha is, fully equipped with love, compassion, wisdom, etc. And then try to see everything in the light of the reality of interdependence. In the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, he says, we inter-are, I inter-am, you inter-are, everything inter-is. With this, we stop here. Please conclude it. Yes, just a few, maybe 4 or 5 rounds.